Thanks for staying with us. Yes, you know that graphic. It is time for Pillow Talk, and it's a big one today. June is Pride Month, and Lexington Pride is this coming Saturday, the 29th. Here to talk about it, Dr. Kristen Mark. She is the Faculty Fellow of LGBTQ Resources at UK and has specialized training in this area. Of course, it can be hard for a lot of people to keep up with the language sometimes. It's constantly changing. She's here to help us out. Thank you, Dr. Mark. We love when you are here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's just talk about this title in itself, because as we mentioned, it changes constantly. It's being updated. It's hard to put anybody in a certain characteristic.
Right. Yeah, language changes as culture changes. And so LGBTQ is typically added to it either an asterisk or a plus to represent the variety of other identities that fall within the LGBTQ or queer umbrella, with L standing for lesbian, LG standing for gay, B bisexual, T transgender, and then Q is usually queer or questioning. And then the plus or the asterisk stands for all of the other letters, like A is one of them for asexual, or 2S for two-spirited. There's a whole variety of other letters, and as you mentioned, those are often changing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and let's talk about whatever letter you may fall into or choose to identify yourself as. Is that based on your behavior or what you do, all of that kind of stuff? How do you get put into that group?
Right, sure. So people identify based on how they feel, right? This is not based on certain sexual behaviors. So if you happen to engage in a behavior, or if you're in some cases coerced to engage in a behavior, just because you engage in that behavior that might be thought of for you as characteristic of a certain group, that doesn't mean that you identify that way. So you yourself have to claim the identity. So like, I am bisexual and I claim that identity as a bisexual woman because I've dated men and women, and so I think you need to have that feeling within you that you identify with that group. And that's really the key. Rather, it's also not something that anyone else places upon you.
Right.
It's what develops for yourself, and you develop that over time, and it may come to different people at different times in their lives.
So what if somebody's still kind of on the fence, like they're a little bit confused as to where they fall? Like, what suggestions would you give someone like that?
Yeah, I think that now we're starting to see more and more opportunities for people to engage in the community. For example, Pride, this is Pride Month, so there's a lot of Pride-related activities going on, and engaging in that and being able to feel like you can express yourself in the most true way. That's part of what Pride Month is for. And that gives people the opportunity to kind of test those waters, especially in a place, you know, like Kentucky, for example, where you may not come from a family that's accepting of LGBTQ identity, and that can be really hard and really isolating. So things like Pride Month allow for connection and allow for people to come together and see that there are other people like them out there, that they're not alone.
And I love that you said that it's an identification that somebody else cannot put on you. Somebody else cannot give you your letter or tell you where you stand. You own that.
You own it, yeah.
Well, you've done a lot of research in this area. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we've done a few different studies. One of my favorites was looking at like bisexual individuals who are either in same-sex relationships or mixed-sex relationships, and looking at the erasure of the identity, right? So similar to how you hold your own identity, other people can't label you with an identity just because you're in a certain type of relationship.
Right.
So if you're in a long-term relationship and you do identify as bisexual, then you can often be then assumed to be either lesbian or gay or straight. And then that results in an erasure of that identity. So it's called bi-erasure is the terminology for that. Other research that we've done that's been really interesting has been like looking at actually a lot of similarities in sexual behavior and in experiences between all identity groups, including straight groups. Like, I do a lot of desire discrepancy research, and that's where one person has higher or lower desire than the other, and this exists in the context of all relationships. There's as much variation sort of like within each category of identity as there is between groups. And we really see that in our research that we do around sexual behavior and sexual feelings of desire or that kind of thing in the context of my work,
A group that's coming out a little bit, and I'd like to talk about, and it's not coming out, that's not the right way, especially in this terminology, but you mentioned it, asexuality.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times we think sex with this person.
Sure,
Some
that
people
everyone
don't
should be
want-
having
yeah,
sex.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and that's not the case.
No, there are people who identify as asexual, and what that means is it just means that they do not feel sexual attraction to others, so they still have romantic relationships, and those romantic relationships just aren't really driven by a sexual attraction as much as they are like a romantic attraction or love. Yeah.
And all of this is okay. That's what we want to
That's
make sure.
all
Like,
okay.
nobody can say you're this, you're that.
Right, and that's the other thing too, is that variation exists throughout all of nature. Variation in sexual orientation is absolutely no exception. Variation exists because that's what it's expected to exist. That variation is what is normal.
Right. That's really cool.
Do people have a hard time talking about this sometimes?
They can, yes, and a lot of the time, especially in therapeutic contexts, I'm talking to people where they're having difficulty with their identity, or they're not feeling like they fit into some of the stereotypes of an identity group, which can be really hard because there are so many stereotypes that exist.
Sure.
And so normalizing all of that and really allowing for them to see that there is so much variation and that that's okay. And finding ways to also become comfortable with who you are as an individual, because we do live in a society that really privileges heterosexuality, so it's hard.
And somebody like you is a great person to come talk to, and we always have your information.
Yeah,
We'll throw that up at
definitely.
the end of the show. We appreciate you so much. There's so much to
Thank
talk
you for
about. I
having
wish we had
me.
more time. There's all Dr. Kristen Mark's information. Thank you, Dr. Mark. Stay with us. We'll be right back.